Samachim Beis, and we're at
somewhere in the middle there.
finale of the Gemara toward the end. My have Allah, a little bit more than halfway down the page. Okay, and the question is, what is the final conclusion? If a guy makes Kiddushin with a single witness, does that satisfy the requirements? They both agreed that he gave her Kiddushin. There was only one other man present. Is that valid for Kiddushin? The Gemara says, "My haba if Kahana Amar ein choshen Kiddushin, or Papa Amar choshen Kiddushin." If Kahana says ein choshen Kiddushin, we're not concerned. We don't. In other words, there's no Kiddushin. You need two people. No, there's no two people. It doesn't make a difference if they admit it. It's not valid. If Papa says no choshen Kiddushin, we are concerned. Amar le Rav Asher of Kahana, so Rav Asher says of Kahana, my daidach. What's your reasoning? The alpha is davar mimamen. Because you require two witnesses for Kiddushin, just like you require two witnesses for other monetary matters. If that's the case, then just like by monetary matters, if a guy admits that he owes money, then he owes the money. So over here also, if they both agree that they got married, so why doesn't that satisfy the requirement? Why do we need two witnesses? He says it's very different. In a scenario where you say that you owe money to somebody else, that doesn't impact anybody else. However, in a scenario where the woman and the man say they got married to each other, and now nobody can marry her again. Nobody's able to marry her because there's an impact to other people. Therefore, Hadas Baldin admitting that they got married, it's not really an admission, and therefore it is not valid. You need to have two witnesses. Now we get to the other side of the story, which is an interesting point. Okay, so with regard to Kiddushin, you need to have two witnesses. Here we have an interesting scenario. There were two sons, Mar Zutra and Rav Ada Saba. Mar Zutra and Rav Ada were both the sons of Bnei Rav Mori bar Isser, the sons of Rav Mori bar Isser. And Mori apparently died. And Polag Nechsai Bahad Dadi. So they got together. Presumably they were very yeah. And they get room in your whole Amarlei Al Pishnai made them Amar Rahmana. This that the Torah requires two witnesses. Al Pishnai made them. Is it because we're concerned that one of the brothers might change his mind? And we trust each other. We're not, clearly we're not one of these estate fights, and we're not. We're not going to change our minds. No, it's very simple. The father had no money.
Oh.
I'm kidding. I don't know if that's the case, but when there's nothing to fight over, there's nothing to fight over. I have a friend who lost a relative. His wife's father passed away. They were very poor. I think his mother-in-law said to all the kids, like, each one of you take one credit card to pay back. That's your inheritance. Anyway, so we're not. In other words, so the question is, these two sons of Rav Mori, we're not going to change our mind. We're not concerned. Therefore, there's no need for witnesses. Or do we say or do we say that we require two witnesses to establish the division of the estates? And therefore, over here also, we should require two witnesses. Amar lahu. So Rav Ashi responds to them, le'ibru sahad di elo l'shakrin. The creation of witnesses is for liars. In other words, because you guys appear not to be liars, obviously these are two amiram, and you seem to be able to get along with each other, then you need not be concerned. You don't need witnesses. It's fine. You can split it on your own. Okay. Now we get to another. Once we're discussing a single witness, right? Till now mostly yesterday we were discussing a single witness pertaining to Kiddushin. Abaye gives a few more scenarios. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Amar le'erechad achalta chelav. One witness tells somebody, you've eaten chelav. Chelav is the forbidden fats. The penalty of chelav is kares. Generally speaking, the penalty is kares. If you make a mistake and eat it accidentally, what happens? You need to bring a carbon. So the guy says, really? I didn't know of Allah Shaisek. The guy is silent. He has no clue. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. The halacha is neman. He's believed. And the guy and the individual who the single witness claims eats at eaten chelav has to bring a carbon. About 6 lines in the bottom of the page. The Tana Tuna and the Tana, there's a Bryce that says something similar. A witness says to him, you've consumed forbidden fats. And he says, Lo yachalti. He says, I did not eat them. You're mistaken. Potter. The halacha is you're exempt. You do not need to bring a sacrifice. Taima do amar loy. The reason is because he contradicts the single witness. Ha'ishtik, but the Bryce implies that if he was silent, he doesn't know. So then mehemen, we would believe the single witness. Together? Mm-hmm. Now, again, Abaye is going to give a few examples here. V'amar Abaye, next scenario. Amar lo'ed echad, a single witness says, Nitmu taharisecha. You have these foods. You're convinced that they're tahar. You can eat them when you're tahar. You can eat them with truma, and not the case. Nitmu taharisecha. They became tummy. V'alo shoisek, and the other guy says, I don't know. He doesn't know. He's silent. Neman. It's the single witness is believed. The Tana Tuna and the Bryce says, Eidechad Omer Nitmu, V'alo Omer Lo Nitmu, Potter. They changed that to Tahar. Okay, so a single witness says it's Tameh, and the owner contradicts the single witness, and he says, not the case, it's still Tahar. The halacha is it's still Tahar. Time of the reason is because of the contradiction, because the owner contradicts ha'ishtik, but if he was silent, mehemed, the single witness would be believed. Amar Abaye, another example. Amar lo'edechad sharcha nirva. Okay, he claims here this ox was involved in a scenario, or whether it was a cow, was involved in a scenario in an action of bestiality, either a man or a woman. Now, what happens to an ox that's involved in bestiality? Two things.
You kill it.
If there's witnesses, then all those involved in bestiality are killed, whether it's the man, woman, or the animal. However, if there's no witnesses, then the animal is invalid to be brought as a sacrifice. Or the truth is, regardless, it's invalid. Whether there are or aren't witnesses, but the animal would still be invalid for a sacrifice. So in other words, if the guy admits that he was like Bilam with his donkey, with his ox, then his ox would also be invalid for a sacrifice. So guys, so what happens if a single witness says, Sharcha Nirva, your animal's in the I don't know, whatever they call that building where they engaged in bestiality. V'alo shoisek, and the guy says, I never knew that they were using my animal. The halacha is neman. The single witness is believed, and you cannot bring the animal as a sacrifice. The Tana Tuna and the Bryce gives a similar example. V'shenev de boy avera. One second. If you have an animal that was involved in a sin, i.e., bestiality, or this animal is murderous, but only a single witness has seen it kill, so we can't. Typically, if an animal kills another human being, the animal is killed as well. That also requires 2 witnesses. So the only way we know that this animal has killed somebody or has been involved in bestiality is al pi echad or al pi bailam, was either through a single witness or through the owners. Neman, they're believed, and we will forbid this animal from being brought as a sacrifice. So Gemara says, what's a scenario where we have a single witness? If the owners agree, then the owners themselves could hold the animal, could treat the animal as forbidden. and that's sufficient. Elalav, it must be the shosik, where the owners don't know. And that's why we rely on the single witness to determine the animal cannot be brought as a sacrifice. Okay, so now all of these scenarios, right? We have three scenarios. The first one is the guy eats chaylev, right? The next one is the guy eats, the guy's at truma became tamei, or really anything became tamei. And the third one is this ox was involved in bestiality. All of these are necessary for a buyer to indicate to us that we rely on the single witness. It's more than just relying on the single witness, but it's that this is really the question the Gemara will address now. Is it that we're just relying on a single witness, or is it also is there also a component that the owner is admitting that perhaps it did happen by being silent? His silence is also an admission, so it's not just a single witness, but it's also the admission of the owner. So Gemara explains it's necessary for a buyer to repeat his claim in all three scenarios. Why? Because if he just gave an example of the first scenario where a witness says that the guy ate forbidden fats, chaylev, ilav the kimle ben afshay the avad chum bazar lahavamaisi. I would think that scenario is not just a single witness, but it's also an admission on behalf of the owner, because the owner wouldn't want to bring a forbidden. In other words, if let's say the guy is not guilty, right? He never ate forbidden fats. Mm-hmm. Then the sacrifice that he separates to atone for his sins is actually not a valid sacrifice, because it was separated on a false pretense. In that case, it's actually forbidden to bring the sacrifice into the temple, because it's a non-sanctified sacrifice or animal, and it's not a sacrifice, because the pretense to make it into a sacrifice was false. So there must be we must treat the silence as an admission in order for us to take the severe consequence of the single witness's reliability, which is to bring the potentially non-sacrificial animal into the temple. So there must be an admission there. However, the other scenarios where the admission isn't necessarily there. In the scenario where a guy says that your tahar produce has become tamei, in that case, there isn't much consequence to what happened to the witness, the witness's testimony. Why? Because the guy thinks to himself, okay, whatever, I'm not fighting. I'll just eat it when it's tamei. I'll eat it while I'm tamei. It's not like I can't eat the food anymore. I can still eat it. Yeah. So there's no admission there, and that's why maybe the single witness would not be believed. If Abaya had just told us that scenario, I would think that over there's also an admission. Why? Because there's financial loss. Ultimately speaking, it cannot be eaten during the days of Tahara, when the guy's Tahar, when he wants a Truma. So there's some financial loss there. Because of that, because it's a financial loss during the days of Tahara, so therefore the fact that the fellow is silent must be an admission, because he's willing to accept the loss. But the average ox is not going to be brought as a sacrifice. So the guy thinks that there's no loss at all if the animal is declared not worthy for sacrifice, and therefore he doesn't bother fighting. So therefore, it's necessary for a buyer to say that in all three scenarios, the reliability of a single witness is critical, and it has nothing to do with the admission of the owner. Okay. Now we have to get to a different scenario. A guy says somebody says to a husband, your wife has been adulterous I've seen your wife being adulterous. And the husband does not know, he's shaisik, he's silent. Mahu, what's the story? Omar Abaya says, Neman, he's believed. Rava says, Ein Neman, he's not believed. Have a Dover Shabarava, he's making a claim with regard to he's making a claim pertaining to sexual immorality, and that requires two witnesses. Amar Abaya. So Abaya says, Mina Amin Allah. How do I know this? He was this blind man, and he would organize brises in front of Shmuel. Yom Echad, one day, he was delayed, and he did not come. So Shmuel was wondering where this blind man was. He sent a messenger to go look for him. So the shliach turned left to go walk down the street, and as he turned around the left corner, what happens? The guy comes from the right side of the street. Okay, fine. So he comes to Beis Medrash, and he organizes the brises. He also shliach, when the messenger returns, Amar, he says, Ishtay zinsa, I saw your wife being adulterous. Also come to Shmuel. So the blind man comes to Shmuel. He says to him, what's the story? Amar lei, so Shmuel says to him, if you trust this messenger, zil afka, go divorce her. The Eloi, and if you don't trust her, don't divorce her. My love, what does this mean? What does it mean that he's trustworthy? So simply means he's what does it mean to be trustworthy? It means that he's not a robber, i.e., that there's no suspicion that he's an untrustworthy individual. I.e., if he's a standard single witness, then you're obligated to divorce him. So the Gemara says and that would support the opinion of Abaya. Rava says, what Shmuel actually meant to say to him was not, do you trust him, but it is, do you trust him as if he were two witnesses? In other words, do you have an extremely high level of trust to this person? If you do, then you'd have to rely on him and say that your wife was adulterous. If you're kind of iffy about the guy, like you're iffy about everybody else in the world, basically, as if he is to you like every other Jew, then don't believe him. If he
think he has his eyes on your wife,
certainly don't believe him. But it's basically only if you're like his best friend and you really, really trust that this guy is saying the truth. That in that case, divorce. So that's there's no on an allegation of adultery. But Amar Abaya says, law. I have another source. This is a complicated story here. Tanya, we learned. There was a king whose name was Yanai. Okay, what do we know about Yanai? Yanai was from the clan of Chashmonid. The Chashmonak dynasty began obviously during the time of Hanukkah. They were not the children of Yehudah, of the descendants of David. They were Kohanim. They were eligible to be Kohanim. And after they conquered the Syrian Greeks in the time of the Hanukkah miracle, they ruled the country for as well over 100 years. And one of the prominent members of their dynasty was Yanai. But we'll soon see it wasn't so clear whether Yanai was actually a Kohen. Just because you descend from a Kohen doesn't mean that you okay. Six. Obviously, your grandparents, when they built the temple, they ate vegetables. Let's also eat vegetables. Presumably, this was a time of year it was probably difficult to get vegetables, where vegetables was sort of a luxury dish. And they fed them vegetables on top of golden tables. And they ate it. We'll soon see at a later point. He actually no. He's back. No. Ish, let's send another point also. I believe at the last king of the Hashmonag dynasty, I believe, was Herod. Herod is responsible for the modernization of the temple. And a lot of the you go tour the Temple Mount, not the Temple Mount. Obviously that is prohibited for one to tour. The outside, the Kotel and the Kotel tunnels. A lot of the construction is Herodian construction. He was a questionable character. Yes, he killed many of the rabbis, and what part of his atonement process was basically to rebuild the temple. Okay. So they ate on these tables, but Yanai v'hayasham echad ish let's leiv ra. There was a person there, a letz, he was a scoffer, leiv ra, an evil heart, ublial, full of an evil conniver. Eliezer ben Puira Shemai. His name was Eliezer ben Puira. The Yeber Eliezer ben Puira Yanai Melach. He says to this Eliezer says to King Yanai Hamelach, King Yanai, libam shall prushim alecha. The prushim, the Pharisees, the rabbis, basically at the time, their heart is set against you. So he says to him, Yanai says to him, Umaya, so what should I do? In other words, even though they're sitting and drinking, eating and drinking with you, their heart is not with you. So Eliezer says that they hate you. So he says, how do I know? So how can I determine their hatred? So he said to him, pretend to be the Kohen Gadol. Put the tzitz on between your eyes. So he took the tzitz from the Kohen Gadol and he put it between his eyes, i.e. on his forehead. There was an elder there, Yehudah ben Gedalia Shemai. His name is Yehudah ben Gedalia. Yehudah ben Gedalia Yanai HaMelech says to the king, Yanai HaMelech, King Yanai, Rav l'cha keser malchus. It's enough for you to wear the crown of kingship. Hanach keser kahuna zar shel Aaron. Leave the crown of kahuna for the children of Aaron. Okay, what happened? What was the claim here? Shayu Ayrim, they would say, Imay nishbis b'madim. His mother was captured. His mother was taken captive in Madiam. Because his mother was a captive and therefore suspected of abuse, of violation, therefore his mother has a rabbinic status of being, with regard to a kohen, a zona. She has legal status of the son, and therefore her children are chalolim, and therefore Yanai HaMelech is not a kohen. By Yevuka Shadavar, they tried to investigate this situation, this rumor. And they could not find reliable testimony that indeed the rumor was true. Either way, Yanai was fuming. In his anger, he sort of locked them all up. Elazar ben Puira said to Yanai HaMelech, Hedyet shel Yisrael kachu dini, v'ata melech l'kohen gadol kachu dincha. It's one thing for a regular person to sort of ignore these baseless allegations about his progenitors, those who gave birth to him. You're the king and the Kohen Gadol. This is how you're going to accept it. So he says, so what should I do? So Eliezer says to him, if you listen to me, Roimsem, strike them down, kill them. So Ayana says, okay, well, you kill all the rabbis. What's going to happen? Who's going to teach? So Eliezer says, what do you mean? The Torah, it's all the books on the shelf. It's obvious. You'll keep the libraries around. Whoever wants to learn Torah will go to the libraries. They'll have all the books. Obviously, there were no books then. There were scrolls, and they weren't. This is before the Mishnayos were written, so it would basically only be Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Sheba'al, the written law. So Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak miyad nizrika by apikursis. At that moment, there was a certain amount of heresy there. Why the Havla the Meimer Yanai should have responded Tainaf Torah Sheba'al. This is true of the books of the written law. However, Torah Sheba'al Peh, which was not written down at that point, what's going to be? Miyad immediately b'tayt sarai de Eliezer ben Puira v'yahargu kol chachmei Yisrael. The evil, was the fire. The fire of evil started growing because of this Eliezer, and Yanai killed all the rabbis. And the world was dark. Until Shimon ben Shadach came around and restored the glory of Torah back to what it was before all the rabbis were killed. Okay. It's a very nice story. But what's the question here? What exactly does it mean that they searched for evidence and they couldn't find it? Again, this is Abaya trying to prove a statement that an allegation of a single witness of adultery is sufficient for one to be obligated to divorce his wife. Elaim, if you'll tell me, the Beitrei Amri Yishtavai, Beitrei Amri Lo Yishtavai. What was the investigation? The two sets of witnesses claim that she was captured. Now, an interesting caveat here would be that for the mother there would be a cheskes kashrus, but for the son there would not be a cheskes kashrus. Meaning, for the mother we presume that she was not taken captive, and she is permitted to marry a kohen. And if that becomes established in a court, then she's indeed permitted. However, now that the mother is dead, and we don't really care about the mother at this point, we care about her son. Her son does not have that baseline presumption that what his mother did was kosher, and therefore the son would be a safek kohen, questionable whether or not he would be a kohen. So Maichaz is something sahani, Maichahani. Okay, so in other words, then it would be a legitimate objection to claim that Yanai was not a kohen. Ella must be be'ed echad, meaning two witnesses said that she was not captured, and one witness says she was captured. The time of the kamakash lebeitrei, and the reason is because two witnesses are contradicting. Halav hachi.
Who said that she was captured? Who said she was?
No, so if that happened, then it would be justified to treat Yanai as a non-kohen.
Okay.
But what happened? Two witnesses says she was not captured. One witness says she was captured. Now, because obviously two against one, we believe the two. But if there weren't those two witnesses, then we would trust a single witness. That clearly supports Abaya's notion that a single witness is trustworthy, even in allegations of adultery.
Looks like two witnesses here said she was.
Two against one. That's why we say the allegations against Yanai were not justified.
When I'm reading it says two against two.
That was the first scenario.
Oh, okay.
Next two lines later.
All right, I'm sorry. Okay, there is a single witness.
What was that?
Yeah.
Two against one. So two against one. Okay. It would be sufficient to capture, except ways, right? So two witnesses say at this point happened, and that's not what happened. What happened here? The Amar Rab ben Yomei be'edei Hazalma. What they did was they established the first two witnesses that claimed that she was captured. They established them as liars. How did they do that? At the point in time you claim to have seen this event in this location, you are with us elsewhere. And therefore they're liars, and that's why the allegation was not substantiated. Another possibility. What happened was the first two witnesses said she was captured. The next two witnesses says, you're right, you thought you saw she was captured, but actually you didn't realize that they put in a lookalike, what do they call this, a body double. It was really her maidservant, and she wasn't actually captured. Somebody else was captured in her place. And that scenario also we would rely on the second set of witnesses, and that's why the allegation was not substantiated. Okay. Amar Rava. So Rava says, Mina Minalach, what's my source? The Tanya we learned. Amar of Shimon. Rav Shimon says, Mais Megura Shel Diskim B'Yavna. There was a well, basically a mikvah that was in Yavna. I made this b'cheskes shleima. There was a chazaka, there was a presumption that it was a complete mikvah, and you were able to immerse your vessels in that mikvah, or you can immerse yourself in the mikvah. Umadu, and one day they measured it. V'nimtzis chasera, and actually it wasn't full. So kol tahara shenasu agabo, all the things that were presumed to have become tahar by having gone to the mikvah. Hayor tarfin mitahar. Reb Tarfon said it's tahar. Rabbi Kiva mitame. Rabbi Kiva says it's tamei. So Amar of Tarfon says, one second, mikvah zeh b'cheskes shalom hu. This mikvah had a presumption of being complete. Misafik at the balachasar, atachsarin misafik. You want to say, well, at some point it became a mikveh that was not valid, that wasn't kosher. So don't presume so. Presume it happened at the last possible second. It was probably 5 minutes before you measured it. That's when it became chaser. It was missing. But before that, it was still kosher. Rabbi Kiva says, no, to the contrary. Let's look at the guy who went to the mikveh, right? The guy who went to the mikveh, he was tamei. Becheskas tamei, who I meant, he had a presumption of tumah. That's why he was going to the mikveh in the first place. Misafik at the balatari. Now you want to say, well, maybe the mikveh was kosher, maybe the mikveh wasn't kosher. So you want to make him tahar misafik, al tatarana misafik. Don't make him tahar because there's a doubt. The presumption is he's tamei. Don't treat him as tahar. Amar Tarfon. So Tarfon says, this is comparable to a guy who is he's bringing a korban. So the guy we all thought he was a kohen. He's in the middle of bringing a sacrifice in the mizbeach, and he brings a sacrifice, and what happens? It turns out his mother was divorced. It's a secret divorce. Nobody knew about it. They invalidated it. The halacha is his service is kosher. Now, obviously, if he was a ben grusha, he was a ben grusha when he was born, right? It's not a new thing. You can't become a ben grusha while you're alive. And yet the service is still valid. We'll see why later. So therefore, just like we see the service is valid here, we should say the mikvah should be presumed to be kosher. Together? Rabbi Kiva counters, no. To the contrary. Imagine a guy who's sitting and serving and bringing a korban. Turns out the guy has a blemish. Either he didn't realize it or he didn't realize that type of blemish would invalidate him. Something like that. The service is invalid. Reb Tarfon says 1 second. Hold on. So each one of us is claiming a different comparison. You say it's comparable to a guy with a blemish whose service is invalid. I say it's comparable to a guy who's the son of a divorcee whose service is valid. Okay, let's see who it's more comparable to. If it's more similar to the son of a divorcee, let's compare it to that. If it's more similar to a guy with a blemish, we'll compare it to that. So Rabbi Kiva basically throws the punchline right now, and he says his Rabbi Kiva Lodin. So Rabbi Kiva says, okay, I'll clarify this one for you. The mikvah psulai biyachit. A mikvah is invalidated by a single witness. A balmum, a guy with a blemish, is also invalidated to be a kayin by a single witness. But don't compare it to the son of a divorcee, because it requires 2 witnesses to claim that he's not a kosher witness. So what does this prove here? It proves Rava's point, right? Rava says you need 2 witnesses for an allegation of any form of sexual conduct, including an allegation of adultery. This is very clear. Rabbi Kiva says you need 2 witnesses. This is the point. Okay, let's continue on the subject. We'll get back to the main point of Rava's argument in a moment. Davar achar, another possibility. Mikvah psula b'gufay, b'amum psula b'gufay. A mikvah, the invalidation is in the person himself, right? Mm-hmm. The person is tamei. A balmum, a guy with a blemish, who's the invalidation? He himself is a blemished kayin. However, a divorcee, the son of a divorcee, he doesn't make the blemish. It's his mother that makes the blemish. So therefore, actually, it's more fair to compare a mikvah to a kayin with a blemish than to compare it to a kayin with the son of ben Grusha Mechalutza. So Amar Tarfon says to Akiva, his friend Akiva, called Perish from Chol Perish Mechayim, someone who leaves you, he's leaving life. Effectively, Tarfon sort of agrees that Akiva's argument is really the winning argument. Okay, hold on a second. When we talk about a balmum whose invalidation is with a single witness, what's the scenario? If the individual denies that he has a blemish, is the single witness believed? Ella, it must be the shosek. The individual is silent. He doesn't know if he has a blemish. So similarly, with regard to the son of a divorcee, i.e. Kollel, someone who's invalid to be a kayin, the shosek, there's a single witness and he's silent. Uktani, and the Brisa says, mikvah psula b'yachid, psula b'yachid. the mikvah is invalid by a single witness, and the guy with the blemish is invalid with a single witness. In order to establish somebody as a chol, you need two witnesses. What's the reason for that? Like grava, any allegation of sexual conduct requires two witnesses. Okay, Rabbi says no, not a good proof. Why not? Of course, we're talking about where so one guy says to the other guy, one guy says to the kayan, you have a blemish. And the guy says, no, I don't. Okay, why do we believe the guy who argues? Why do we believe the single witness if he is contradicted by the kayan with the blemish? The reason is because obviously if he has a blemish, what can happen? You can investigate that. The Amr le shlach achvi, take off your clothes and let's see if you have a blemish. Behind the Tani, and this is what the Mishnah means by mikvah psula begufay. 1 second. Okay, we'll stop here. The completion of this price. So basically, what we're left to understand is the source that if the son of the chol basically performs the avodah, the service is valid, and if a guy with a blemish, performs the avodah, the service is invalid. What's the source? A couple of sources in the direction. We'll continue tomorrow. Great day.